So in those situations where I feel like I don't belong and I feel the discrimination and I feel like I don't belong in that space, I always tell them elbows out. It's really important to create that space. And so here I am, this Muslim, British, Bangladeshi woman of color with mental health illnesses, saying that this space that you say is yours can be mine too. So I tell my kids all the time, elbows out. When you feel like that space isn't there, you create it. Because for me, my mental health has been something that I've kind of battled from a really early age, but mental health and work is only something that I've dealt with for 4 years. So, there's just over the last few days, I've had a really good friend really struggle and she's had a breakdown and really struggled. And for me, that's the first time I've ever seen anyone like that, but she's had to come away from work for a couple of weeks, and it's just kind of some of the emails and some of the kind of correspondence that she's getting since then is quite shocking, because there was the words were, what's actually wrong with you? And that's the bit that got me. I couldn't quite believe that she's sick, she's not well, it's an actual thing. When someone says, what's actually wrong with you? It's not a made up illness, It's actually real. And I think that is the part, that is why this is such a big issue and why it's such a problem, because people don't actually believe that it's a real illness. Yeah, and I think that is a part of the problem. I think there's a massive disconnect between people who suffer with mental health illnesses and people who don't. And I think somewhere that gap needs to be bridged. And I think it's just having events like this is such a wonderful thing, because I can only kind of scale it down to my own life and think about kind of, there's me who suffers with mental health illness, and I have since the age of maybe 6, and my husband who seems to get through life without worrying about anything. I mean, not even normal. How I remember going to therapy last year, and the therapist said, anxiety is normal. Every grown-up, every child will suffer some sort of anxiety. They'll worry about things. Like, honestly, my husband does. It seems like he doesn't worry about anything. So much so there's something else wrong with him. Honestly, I don't even get it. So he's so completely the other end of the spectrum. So, there's definitely a disconnect, and we need to bridge that gap, and I think that's really important. That was tricky. That was really difficult, because you go off, you come off something as bright and breezy as Bake Off, and you just it's all about baking, and it's wonderful and it's great, and if I go back to when I was doing Bake Off, I was having a panic attack every weekend, and that takes its toll on you. Anyone who's had a panic attack will know that once you've had one, it takes weeks to get back up from one, and I was having one every weekend, every week, while practicing, while filming, so it was really, really hard for me, and it was only a year and a bit after that, I realized that it's really, I started to talk about my mental health kind of in bits, not massively. I used to talk about it in bits, and I realized that by talking about it, my husband understood it very differently, because I was opening up to people, and I was just having this conversation today to somebody else, that it's easier to open up to everyone than to open up to the people that are closest to you. And it was, in some ways, it felt really important for me to do it, because I felt like a bit of a fraud. It's like, it is who I am, it's who I've always been. So talking about it really helped me to kind of understand my own mental health. I think once I had kids, my kids, first few years of their life, they were told quite often, oh, mum's just very sleepy, or mum's very tired. They're probably thinking, this woman is lazy. She doesn't get out of bed. But I was in bed a lot, and they would kind of play around me. And a lot of our first few years of their life was just them, kind of me in bed and them around me. And I think, had I not been in the public eye, I think I still would have been honest with my children And it's the most important, to be honest, with my kids, because that's something, doing this in the public eye and being so open about it in the public eye means that my kids understand it, and they have to also deal with the fact that I have a mental health illness, and they have to talk to everyone around them and explain it to them as well at the same time. So yeah, I think I still would have, even if I wasn't in the public eye, because part of being a parent is, let's face it, lying. You know, that's part of parenting, is lying to them most of the time, which is exactly what I do most of the time. But I felt like a fraud. I did feel like a liar. I felt like I needed to tell the people that were closest to me, and they were my kids. You know, it was important to be honest with them. Yeah, but I think in some ways that's difficult as well, because when you open up about your mental health and you're honest about it, and then you've got the beast that is social media, and you say, oh yeah, well, I suffer with mental health illnesses and I've got PTSD, and then you get this barrage of people on social media who say, oh, you're only just, have you got a book out? Is that what it is? And is that why you're... And then suddenly you question yourself. You go from having this illness to questioning yourself as to why you're doing it and why you're talking about it. And that's not a good place to be. So it was really difficult to talk about it, and really difficult to be open about it. So I can understand, for anyone who is in the hierarchy of the workplace, if you are right there at the top, I can understand why it might be difficult to open up about something like that, because, you know, people look at you and think, oh, but you've got the best job, you're earning the most money, how can you have a mental health illness? And that's what I get all the time. And I promise you, I won nothing on Bake Off apart from a trophy. Genuinely.
Yeah. No.
And everyone, honestly, my grandma thinks I've got a mattress of money. I haven't. I said, I haven't. I got a trophy that's a cake stand that you can't even really use. You really can't. It's wonky. It's weird. Can't even use it. Absolutely not. There's no such... So I did a documentary, Anxiety and Me, last year, and it was... that was this year. My goodness. I filmed it last year. It was this year. And it's the first time my dad found out that I have anxiety, so he didn't have a clue. And he said, I'm angry with you. And I said, why? And he said, I don't really know. So he didn't understand it. And I said, do you want to talk about it? Should we talk about it? Is there something, I can explain it to you? And he's like, nah, you're right. So I tried to open up. I did a whole documentary on it, and still it didn't work. So, and growing up I think as a Muslim, I've tried to confront it as being a Muslim. I suppose there's two parts to this answer. As a Muslim woman, as a Muslim, I've tried to open up about having mental health illness and I've spoken to people of, quite religious people, tried to understand why I have it, if there's any way I can help. And a lot of it is just very much, it's kind of difficult because it's very much, you should pray and you should have faith. And, you wouldn't go to a doctor and say, I suffer with PTSD. And he wouldn't say, I think you should pray more. It doesn't work that way. So I think for me, there's definitely a disconnect with religion and also culture. Growing up, there's no actual word in my culture for mental health illness. So there isn't even a word. So if there's no word, it doesn't exist. So, a lot of it is very, people who do suffer with mental health illnesses, it's kind of, myths like that they've been possessed or drugs are to blame all the time. So there's no word. So even now, to this day, I've tried to open up about it with my own family, and it doesn't exist. So there's definitely a disconnect there with culture also. There's a stigma attached to mental health, and there's a shame attached to mental health illness. And I think that is a massive example of how shameful I felt for having it, that I went into an entire marriage and didn't even tell my husband. I actually married him, still didn't know. And I talk about that really openly in the book, because I did feel like I was damaged and I wasn't a whole person. And I felt like if I'd told him that, then he wouldn't have married me. And I always ask him, I said, if I told you, would you have married me? He's like, no. He jokes, but I think he would have. I hope he would have. But there's such a stigma attached to it. I didn't even tell my future husband. And it was tricky. and at the very beginning, it was something that he didn't understand, and it's taken him. I mean, we've been talking about it a lot recently, because especially kind of near the end of the year, where I've had a really busy year and he's had a busy year, and we're trying to wind down now. We talk about all the kind of struggles we've had through the year, and it's taken him, I would say, a good 13 years to fully understand what it's like to be, to understand mental health. And I think he still to this day doesn't fully understand it, but he's the other side of mental health illness. He's very practical, my husband. So he has a note, he has a folder on me in his phone. He does. And
a folder?
Like a whole folder in his phone of notes. And he writes down the triggers just in case he forgets. He does, honestly, he does. He writes them all down, but he's really practical like that. But sometimes if there's something, he's like, oh, there's a new one, and I can hear him say it, and then he's putting it in his phone. So he does, like, I am like this joke act also in my house, because I had a panic attack a couple of years ago where a food shop came in, and I ordered coriander, but they gave me parsley, and I don't know on what planet coriander and parsley are the same, because they're not. They're totally different. So he's like, there's another trigger. So he writes it all down. So I think the only way I help him is to be honest. And I'm really, at the very beginning, I hid a lot from him, and I didn't talk about it honestly and openly. And I think for me and my family, not just my husband, I think we have to kind of involve especially my children, where I'm really honest with them. I talk to them about it. I don't hide it anymore. It's not a secret, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that it's taken me 12, 13 years to say, right, I'm not ashamed of it anymore. This is real. It's just like, cutting yourself or breaking a bone. It all needs time to heal, and it needs medication, or it needs some sort of treatment. And so I'm really honest about it. I don't hide it anymore. So I've suddenly gone from being a stay-at-home mum. And you suffer discrimination no matter where you are. I think whether you work or not. I remember being a stay-at-home mum. I was a stay-at-home mum for 8 years, and I could never say those words. I could never say I'm a stay-at-home mum, because that look on people's face when you say you're a stay-at-home mum, as if you're so lazy. Like that kind of. So when are you going to get an actual job? I've had that. For 8 years I had. So when are you going to get a real job? It's like, it's an actual. I know it doesn't pay me anything, but. I am going to create human beings who are going to be wonderful, who are going to go out into society. Not to say that if you're not at home with your parents, that if you're not at home with your kids, that you're going to create delinquents. That's not at all what I'm saying. But that was my job, and that was a choice that I made. I think you suffer discrimination whether you're at work or not. And now I work in an industry where I am the only. I walk into a arena where I'm the only Muslim woman. It doesn't help that I'm 5'1", a woman of color, and then I work in an industry where it's mostly predominantly Caucasian middle-aged men. And then you turn up and you're like, and suddenly there have been instances where I know that it's threatening for me to turn up, because it's like, oh, she's here to take her. I'm not here to take anyone's job. Seriously, I'm just here to do mine. That's all it is. So it is. I don't know how. I think there's something that I say, and it's there's a thing that I say to my kids. I always tell them elbows out. So in those situations where I feel like I don't belong, and I feel the discrimination, and I feel like I don't belong in that space, I always tell them elbows out. It's really important to create that space. And so here I am, this Muslim, British, Bangladeshi woman of color with mental health illnesses, saying that this space that you say is yours can be mine too. So I tell my kids all the time, elbows out. When you feel like that space isn't there, you create it. So here I am saying elbows out. Yeah.